Welcome to Concept in Medicine. In today's tutorial, we'll be talking about cross-sectional study. Cross-sectional study is also a type of observational epidemiological study, which is descriptive in nature. You should know that cross-sectional study is useful in generating hypotheses. Because of that, we'll say that it describes more. It is descriptive in nature. So it's a type of descriptive epidemiology. It falls under the descriptive epidemiology. All right. For the cross-sectional study, it can also be referred to as a snapshot of the population study, meaning that it is able to take a picture of the population at one point of time, meaning that for that, both exposure and outcome will be known at that point in time. Both exposure and outcome are present at that point in time, and they will be known at that point in time. Because of that, it's referred to us as a snapshot of population study. It can also refer to us as the prevalence study because it's able to compute prevalence, specifically the point prevalence, because it's done at one point of time. All right, so let's describe more. So if we take this Venn diagram here, taking this circle as being the exposure and taking this one as being the outcome, then we'll see that if exposure is known and the outcome is not known and we have to find it, then we'll say that that becomes a cohort study. Likewise, if the outcome is known and the exposure is not known and it has to be found, then that gives us case control study. But bear in mind that in case control study, both exposure and outcome have already occurred. Just that it is only the outcome that we know and we don't know the exposure. So that is what the epidemiologists will be finding. That is why we say that it is also known as a cohort study, which is a colloquial name of the case control study. Then for the cohort study here, the exposure is known and the outcome is not known. And again, for cohort study, exposure has occurred, but outcome has not occurred. And that is what is going to be followed into the future to be determined. That is why we call the cohort study as also prospective study, follow-up study. Then if you come to the bisection region of the Venn diagram, we'll say it's cross-sectional study because both the exposure and the outcome are known at that point in time, at one point of time. So because of that, it becomes more like a picture. So when you take a picture, everything becomes stationary and you are able to identify the risk, and that is the exposure, and the outcome, that is going to be the disease. So that study, that is able to identify both the exposure and outcome at one point of time, such that the results are presented to the population. Then we call that a snapshot of population study, or what we call the cross-sectional study. And you should also know that the cross-sectional study is the simplest form of observational epidemiological study. Simplest form of what? Observational epidemiological study. All right, let's move ahead and look at the advantages and disadvantages of the cross-sectional study. The first one is going to be, it gives a snapshot of the population. Snapshot means that it's able to capture both exposure and outcome at one point in time, at one point of time. So because of that, we'll say it's able to give that snapshot of the population. The next one is that it's more useful for chronic diseases. For chronic diseases, meaning that the disease, which is the outcome, is already known and the exposure is already in sight. So because of that, cross-sectional study will be useful more in cases of chronic diseases. The next one is going to be, as we said, it's also known as a prevalence study. It provides the prevalence of the disease under study. And the type of prevalence that it provides, we call it a point prevalence. Why? Because the exposure and the outcome are determined at one point of time. Then the next one is that it is less time consuming, and another one is that it is cheap. We know that cross-sectional study describes more. That is why we said it belongs to the descriptive epidemiology. Then let's move ahead and look at the disadvantages. For the disadvantages, you should know that the cross-sectional study provides information on the distribution of the disease and not the etiology. So it means that on etiology is going to provide little information or nothing. So in that case, the information on the etiology will be inaccurate. The next one is that it does not establish time sequence, as is unable to what? Establish the causality, meaning the causal effect relationship. The next one is that it provides little information on the natural history of a disease or incidence of a disease. And when we say natural history of a disease, what are we talking about? The progression of a disease process without an intervention, or in the absence of an intervention, which may be in the form of a treatment. Then another disadvantage is that it is more prone to bias. It is more prone to bias. And that would do for the advantages and disadvantages of cross-sectional studies. Then finally, you should know that the unit of study for cross-sectional study is going to be the individual. So a wrap-up of the cross-sectional study. Cross-sectional study, we said that it can be used to generate hypotheses. It's a type of observational epidemiological study. It's more descriptive. That is why we are putting it under the descriptive epidemiology. And it is also referred to as the snapshot of the population study. Why? Because it captures both the exposure and the outcome at one point of time, and the results are presented to the population. Then finally, because it's able to compute the point prevalence, it is also referred to as the prevalence study. On that note, we've come to the end of this session. Kindly make sure to subscribe to my channel, like, share, and also recommend to friends. And do not forget to put on a notification button. Feel free to comment the next concept you would like to see on my channel in the commentary section. My name is Dr. Del, and once again, this is Concept in Medicine. Bye-bye.